Good morning, all starships in the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta quadrants. This is Rediscovering the Federation on the Movers and Shakers Unlimited network. I am your host, author Josh Pritchett, head of the Northern Virginia Star Trek Media, and I am joined once again by my partner in crime, Mr. Chris Pabone.
Good morning, everyone, and reaching out to the other Star franchise out there. Happy May the 4th weekend.
And also, happy Revenge of the Sith. You may all notice that I am not in my usual headquarters. I am today talking to you from one of the many fine chapters of the Fairfax City Library. As always, please support your local library whenever you get a chance. It's always nice to check out the books and all the other services that your local library can offer you. Well, Chris, it's a little bit ironic that I am in a library today because you know what the first rule of a library is, don't you?
Return your books.
Well, okay, the second rule is shh, be courteous to the other readers. And since the name of this week's episode is called Whistle Speak, I think whistling is not exactly something appropriate for the library. So, bit ironic here, don't you think?
Slightly, yeah.
Yes. So, any rate, so without further ado, I think we should get into our recap of this week's episode. So let's fly. So this week, after the events of last week when they report the ISS Enterprise, Kovich has identified that one of the 5 scientists has hidden the next clue to a Denoblian weather tower on the planet of Halamno, which holds off this tower apparently holds off deadly sandstorms and provides rain to the inhabitants. However, the tower has been there for nearly 700 years, and it is starting to break down, as we soon find out. So Michael and Tilly go down to the planet and pose as inhabitants of the planet in order to try to get closer to the tower. Meanwhile, back on the ship, Adira has been moved up to the bridge by Commander Rayner to give them an opportunity to really show their stuff. And Adira, is being a great engineer in their own right, is trying to talk them through how they will have to make repairs. But first, they must undergo a ritual to get access to the tower. Chris?
So this is all part of what we will see later on is sort of the spirituality involved in the episode. And the uniqueness of this, as Josh has referred to at the beginning, is that they communicate their language is sort of whistling. And so the universal communicator, of course, allows them to translate. They come up to a group of people who are making this pilgrimage to the tower. It's something sacred. And with the people, they get there and they discover that there's a race. So you have to prove your worthiness to enter the tower. The tower, of course, the Denobulans have disguised it as a natural environmental structure. And so to win the race, to enter it, you have to win the race. So Tilly and Burnham decide, okay, we're going to enter the race. No big deal. And meanwhile, on Discovery, Adara, who's a little bit nervous about being on the bridge, discovers that there actually were more than just one tower. That is just the remaining tower that is there, and that more than likely it is leaking radiation, so that if they can pinpoint the location of a radiation leak, they can find at least the exterior controls for the tower. And so they all get ready to run the race. In the meanwhile, Act B, if you will, on Discovery is that the Doctor is really wondering where this spiritual awakening of his is coming after his union with the Trill, and the scientific mind of his says, well, maybe it's something that is a medical/scientific consequence of my union. And he goes to Paul and says, like, maybe we can do like in a basic and a very advanced CAT scan to figure out, okay, this is a consequence of the union, and that's why I'm feeling this way. And so Stamets agrees, and they're going to do this. Meanwhile, we go back to the planet, and we've got to start the race. And surprise, the twist they weren't expecting is that they were given the equivalent of a salt tablet, which of course will make you very thirsty. And as anyone who's run a race knows, um, you get really thirsty. And so there are several containers of water along the path. And if you drink one of them, you're disqualified. Um, and they are everywhere. And so you're running this race, you've got the salt tablet, and people are dropping off left and right. And so they're in the midst of this. Then Burnham discovers some moss that has a very unique color, and she theorizes, okay, this must be because there's the control panel must be near here. We know from a diver that it's leaking radiation, and that's why you're getting this moss. It should not be this color. So she basically taps out by drinking a bowl of water, lets Tilly go on, and like she discovers the control panel and gets to work on it. Meanwhile, Tilly is running the race, and it's down to her and the daughter of someone who doubles as a doctor and a spiritual healer among the people who live around this tower. And again, as Josh referenced, the entire planet is one massive sandstorm, and this is the lone oasis left. And even this tower is beginning to fritz because it's been 700 years. Josh?
Right. So, as Chris said, they are basically they're having to run this race, and what happens is Tilly and the child of the person that's sort of the leader for this group are the last two people, but the child Raven drops their water as they're getting close to the finish line. So Tilly goes back and shares her water, and so they're both able to go into the tower. But for some reason, we don't quite know, Raven's father does not want them to go into the tower. But then they're up in the tower and using a new type of tricorder, which is basically made into kind of contact lenses. Tilly is able to examine the inside of the tower and realizes that it's made of tritium, which, as most Star Trek fans will remember, tritium is a key element in the construction of Federation starships. At this point, they know that they're on the right track. And unfortunately, though, Tilly discovers that when they are locked in the tower, they're basically being sacrificed to the gods because the air is drained out of the tower, and it is going to activate to start raining soon. Meanwhile, Michael has found the auxiliary junction box that's located near the tower and has, with Adira's help, been repairing it to get it up and running. Unfortunately, because Tilly and Revan or Rava, I'm sorry, have been locked in this thing, they cannot beam them out. So Michael makes the decision to beam her into the room. Unfortunately, Rava's father is just outside the room in which Tilly and Rava have been locked in. So this prompts Michael that she is going to have to violate the Prime Directive if she wants to save them. And she then explains to the father that aliens, in this case the Denoblians, had built this tower to help them, not to interfere with their development. But unfortunately, the adjoining towers have since failed, and this is the last one that's still working. And now what they want to do, she convinces them that basically, well, we don't know if your gods are real or not, but these other aliens wanted to help them in order to survive, and that was part of their mission. Um, so they decide that the sacrifices were not ever necessary, and Burnham doesn't know why they started doing this. But then they get Tilly and Rava out and are able to finish making repairs on the tower in order to get it up and running, so it'll keep protecting the planet from the dust storms. Meanwhile, Culber is still trying to come to terms with his shared spirituality experience of having the Trill, and Book is still dealing with his feelings about his breakup with Michael and the actions he took in last season, as well he should. And it kind of and Culber kind of, they finally sit down and just share a meal together and try and sort of just share their feelings. Meanwhile, they find the clue in a carving on the wall of the device, which will lead them to their next rendezvous, and that essentially brings it into our recap of this week's episode. So, Chris, what did you think was best about this episode?
In general, I didn't love the episode. I felt like you have episodes that are filler. This I would call spiritual filler. I didn't like it that much, but so I will dig to see what I can find, what I liked, and I think it's the unintended consequences of trying to help someone, which I think is why we have the Prime Directive. So obviously the Nobulans tried to help this population, perhaps because they saw that the composition of the planet, which was a massive dust storm again, is similar to theirs. And they thought, okay, we're going to build these on towers. It's going to make their life great. But as the Discovery crew points out, you need someone to do maintenance on them. And so they are eventually going to fail. You just can't build something and then forget about it. I mean, you have to tell someone, hey, we did this. You have to go and keep on, refurbishing it. So weirdly enough, I think the good part is that it shows that if you do something, you have to make sure that it's sustainable. Otherwise, it's going to fail, and it's going to lead to weird unintended consequences, such as sacrifices made in a tower. As you pointed out, no one knows why they started doing this, but at some point in the revolution, because they didn't understand what was happening, someone must have come up with the idea like, hey, human sacrifice, and like, yeah, that sounds good. I kind of like that they pointed out the unintended consequences and the need for, like, if you do something for someone, you have to sustain it. Or teach them, because it's kind of like the parable, like teach a man, woman, or teach a person how to fish, they'll eat for a day. No, sorry, I'm getting it wrong. Give a person a fish, they eat for a day. Teach them how to fish, and they eat for like a lifetime. But
I like the Klingon expression. Teach a man to throw a man off a cliff, and he'll fly for the rest of his life.
Very true. Oh, and of course, the other good thing about this episode, I must say, is that very little book.
Okay, yeah, not much book.
Not much book.
I do want to talk more about the Prime Directive aspect. I'm glad you brought that up, but I want to talk about that when we get to the Gorn section of today's show. I will just say that I enjoyed Dira. I thought was great. I think Raynor's continue to evolve. Excuse me there, folks. And I like the fact that we were kind of doing a good old-fashioned Prime Directive episode. So we haven't had a lot of those on Discovery, and I think it's really nice to have one. The other thing is I thought that it was a really interesting idea. I mean, this really did feel like, in a lot of ways, a classic Trek episode that harkened back to the episode about Vol and feeding Vol. If anybody remembers the one I'm talking about, where the people of this planet were feeding this giant computer that was kind of keeping their planet in a perpetual Eden instead of letting them develop. There was some of that. That was kind of what I liked best. As far as bad, I think Chris, you and I were talking about this last night at the party. We were talking about how, okay, they took this thing's supposed to suck all the oxygen out, but it left these this fire that was in the room going. So, and the fire should have died out. So that's kind of bad science right there. Also, I think it would have been nice if we could have, instead of, I know Michael's the lead character and all that, but it would be kind of nice, I think, if you had away missions where Michael didn't feel like doing a Captain Kirk and have to be the one to go on all the away missions. That it would be nice if we could have had some other characters go on the away mission, and it didn't have, people that were actual engineers, like, Teague Navarro, would that have been kind of cool? I mean, what if Tig and Tilly went down? I mean, granted, I don't know how well Tig would have done about running, but there were, I think, some other characters they could have sent down. I just to expand out, because, like I said, I think a lot of the scenes just, you talk about the air getting sucked out of the room. I think sometimes, and I like Sonequa Green Martin, but I think sometimes it's nice to let other characters step up. So it's not just the all Michael show.
I mean, absolutely. It should not be just the captain and book 24/7. I mean, that was part of the appeal of the trail episode. We got to showcase the Doctor. I mean, there are other people on this ship. There are actual engineers. Like, send down Adara. Great to see Adara in the bridge. Overdue, but come on, like, especially now that we're down into the stretch run. And I understand they didn't realize that it was going to be the series finale. Send some other people. This was the perfect episode to showcase the talents of some other members of the cast. And the captain could have been equally worried about the person in the tower when she was in the ship as on the ground. I mean, like, it's not just Book and the captain 24/7. I mean, we're kind of staring into Captain Kirk territory, which I thought we were trying to lean out of, which is like, there are other people. Send other people. One thing I didn't buy as well about this episode, in addition to, like, the fires that have gone out, is I know they used Tilly for the race because we've seen her when she was on Discovery before. Like, she was racing, she was jogging around the ship, but it's cross country is completely different from just, like, a running surface. Like, I have a walking half mile, not half mile, it's like quarter mile thing set up at my local community center so people can have exercise and stuff, right? It's flat, it's round, great. That's one thing. But when you do running and you're going uphill, downhill, that is not the same. So if the thought was running flat surfaces is the same as running cross country, it is completely not. So whoever wrote that episode really needed to factor that in, because I'm just not buying that someone who's used to, like, flat surface like a track. I'm not buying that a track runner could run cross country that efficiently. So I'm not buying that totally. And we'll talk about this a bit more in the Gorn, but what has more weight, the Prime Directive or a Red Directive? Because yes, clearly he violated the Prime Directive here, but does one outweigh the other? So we'll talk about that. And the other thing Josh and I were talking about is, I really wanted to go to Denobula. I mean, they mentioned Denobula. I'm like, yes, we're finally going to see where Phlox came from. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then they made it's like a side trip. I'm like, what? No, did you, like, run out of the budget here? Like, take us to Denobula. Don't take us like this side planet. I mean, I want to see Denobula. I did not want to see, like, with all due respect to this planet, which seemed okay when it's not engulfed by sandstorms, I didn't want to see this.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I would very much like to go see Denoblia. We've been to Trill twice in this series. We've been to Kronos. We've been to Vulcan a bunch of times. Actually, I'm kind of getting a little tired of going to Vulcan.
Everyone goes to Vulcan.
Done that. Got the T-shirts. Actually, you mentioned who the writers. One of the writers I noticed was Kenneth Lynn, who worked on the series, the Bruce Lee series Warrior. He co-wrote that with Bruce Lee's daughter Sharon. Um, has actually written a number of things. This is, as far as I know, his first venture into doing Star Trek. So there were some things about this episode I did think were pretty good. I thought, like I said, I was happy with it being a good old-fashioned Prime Directive show. Um, but yeah, I mean, there was some, the science part fell down, and you're right about the cross country thing. I mean, if, like, say, okay, Tilly and Michael had been training on the holodeck doing cross country
Yes.
stuff on the holodeck, yeah, that would have been kind of cool. But we did not know that. I, going back slightly to the good. One last thing I want to mention about the good. I did like how Tilly has been evolving as the teacher, and clearly they are setting up for Starfleet Academy. And I I don't know if Mary Chapin is coming back to play Tilly on that series. I hope she is. I hope several people that who have been underutilized on Discovery will be back for that show, because apparently it is taking place in the 32nd century.
Yeah,
so I would very much like to see that. One last bad thing. Still disappointed, no sign of the Klingons. But as you said, they probably were eaten by the Section 31 enhanced tribbles that we saw at Picard.
Absolutely, they ate them all.
Oh dear, that sucks. Yeah, but you do a here bipar. I hate tribbles. So getting though into the Gorn and our discussion today on the Prime Directive. Okay, so how do we reconcile the Prime Directive? We keep getting told, okay, this is this law that we would all die to protect, but it always seems like they find an out to get this crew who's been caught up in the Prime Directive. They've always found an out for it, so no one's actually dying. We've never seen anybody actually die for it. We've seen them come close, but so you have to wonder, what exactly do we mean by non-interference? Well, okay, obviously the most obvious one is do not share your highly advanced technology with a less developed race that probably could not handle it, especially like if you're giving them weapons. I mean, as we saw in the classic series episode of Private Little War, where the Klingons were arming one group of these planet's inhabitants with firearms in order to kill the other side, and Kirk, under the spell of one of these people, planned to give the other group matching weapons. I mean, obviously that's a big violation of the Prime Directive right there. Upping their technology, but in this case, but like in, for example, in the another classic series episode, A Piece of the Action, an earlier Starfleet vessel went to a planet and left them with some basic technology on how to build radios and other technology, and also a book on the history of Chicago gangsters. And the inhabitants of this planet remade themselves based off these gangsters. And of course, it's regarded as one of the more humorous episodes. But again, it was an unintentional violation. But at the time, that was supposed to be before the Prime Directive was created. So yeah, and and obviously that was a huge violation. Millions of people probably died as a result of that. But so yeah, there's that. But you have another episode, the episode, I can't remember the name of it, but it was in the Next Generation of season 2. And Data had made contact with this alien child who was trying to find someone who could help her planet because it was dying, and the Enterprise decided to intervene to save these people. Okay, so you can't just say, all right, yeah, that's sad, but we're not going to do anything to save these people. But they realized it is in our power to fix this problem. We can fix this for them. We should do something about it, but we should not let them know we exist. They could just, they'll just carry on. They just, or if they see an asteroid heading to a planet and they decide to destroy it to save the inhabitants, even if the the inhabitants don't know about them or didn't ask them. Yeah, that's another thing. I mean, I guess that's one way to let them evolve. Um, but I guess the question I want to ask is, how much help is too much, Chris?
Well, I actually view this from a different angle, at least for this episode, which is who cares if it's a red directive? Like, what has more weight here? Is it the red directive or is the prime directive? Because on the one hand, you have to respect the prime directive, but if you've got a red directive and that means do this at all costs, which I think, it's been pretty clear, at least from Kovitz's perspective, then yeah, break it. It doesn't matter because this happens to be a red directive. So that's the conflict that I have with this episode. It's like, which which trumps which? Is it prime directive or red directive, or is it red directive or prime directive? So that's one. And then two, as far as the prime directive applies here in this episode, um, you know, why couldn't she have just said, "Yeah, I'm a goddess"? She simply could have said that if you are wanting to protect this culture, and this culture believes in gods and goddesses, she could have easily said, "Yeah, I'm a goddess." But even more easily, which I don't understand, is why couldn't they have just beamed her behind him, and she just simply stunned him? And then, he wakes up, everything's been fixed, and he'll think, oh, like I must have been touched by a god or something. So I think there were ways around this rather than just like beaming in front of him saying, hey, I'm an alien. I, so again, I think there were some weaknesses in the writing of the episode itself. So those are my critiques at a micro level. Then at a macro level, this whole thing about the prime directive is like, if you are going to somehow help the civilization, which clearly the Denobulans wanted to do, like unclear to me if when they did this, they were themselves bound by the prime directive. But if you're going to offer help, then it has to be in a way that's sustainable. And this clearly was not. And so you have unexpected consequences when you don't make something sustainable. And in this case, because they interfered, the natural evolution, much like when we saw in some of the other Star Trek episodes, when a piece of the accent, for example, when they all start thinking, okay, this is how things are, and like I've got Tommy guns, this is going to be Chicago in the 20s. At some point in their natural evolution, they became to think kind of like the Aztecs, like, oh, we have the reason why these towers are failing because there are more than one is because we weren't giving human sacrifices. Like, we don't know who did this, but at some point, someone came up with this idea that, oh, we got to like sacrifice someone. That's how the towers are going to work. And so since the towers probably didn't fail all at the same time, they probably adopted this after the first or the second tower failed. It probably in their minds worked. Not because they're sacrificing someone and have this race. It was because, they put them in there. The process worked. The machinery works, and they attributed the machinery working. Oh, because now we're sacrificing people. So you have to be like really careful. And if you're going to intervene in someone's culture, it just can't be a one and done. It's got to be something sustainable, something that you're monitoring. And for God's sake, tell someone, like, yeah, maybe the Federation Council is not going to be cool with you if you are having to abide by the Prime Directive. But you have to have follow-up. You have to have monitoring. I mean, that was the cool thing of, I think it's Who Watches the Watchers. I think it was season 3 of Star Trek: The Next Generation. That you have an outpost. They're looking at what's going on, how the culture's adapting. I mean, you've got to be watching. One and dones might solve the problem in the short term, but it's not going to solve the problem in the long term. What's going to happen is people are going to adapt to explain things they can't explain. And what is the old saying? Magic is just science we don't understand. So the sudden appearance and disappearance of these oases, protecting them from these storms, is them using their own cultural knowledge to explain something they can't explain. And it ended up causing harm. Who knows how many people died needlessly in those towers? I mean, clearly it was her mom, was one of them, but it didn't need to be. So,
Right.
The macro level, I think it didn't matter. Red directive versus prime directive. I really would like a decision on that. But if you're going to interfere, make sure that you're watching what is the unintended consequences of your interference.
Right. I think I give them an A for effort for creating a Prime Directive episode, which we have not. Again, we have only seen a couple of times, I think, on Discovery. Um, on the other hand, yeah, maybe the whole episode would have been better if it had been Denoblia, and we could have gone there, and maybe we could have even gotten John Billingsley to come back and play a descendant of
Mhm.
Phlox. And if we weren't going to say use Maul and Locke, if they were kind of off somewhere recouping, maybe we could have had the Breen shown up and be the big villains of the episode. Of course, I'm just writing this. I'm playing armchair writer here on this, but maybe getting into a deeper issue about, okay, these Denoblians who wanted help the civilization and thought, hey, okay, we're going to help them now, but they'll give up their pagan beliefs and begin to embrace science. Well, apparently that did not happen. Or, we can't really know what the long term plan was, or it was just chalked this up to some, writing and they were whatever. But I don't think it really, another good example is in the second Kelvin timeline movie, Star Trek Into Darkness, in which the Enterprise stops this volcano from erupting, and in order to save Spock, they have to come down near the ground to beam him up, and it completely alters this culture's belief structure, because then they start worshiping the image of the Enterprise instead of the gods they had before. So, what does that do?
So,
And
like,
clear.
Josh,
Sorry, go ahead.
in your opinion, did C need to just beam directly in front of him? Was there other ways that he could handle this?
Well, your idea of like, okay, Michael could have beamed in and stunned the father and figured out how to open the chamber up and save Tilly and Raven would have probably might have been a better idea, but they still needed to fix the machine in order to keep it working, and they would have just kept doing these sacrifices anyway. Um, so I guess in a way, was it the right idea to interfere? Probably not. But at the same time, they had been continuing to do this for, for hundreds of years, these sacrifices. So maybe this was a way to get them to stop. So maybe that was a good idea. But,
But
should the Denoblians, should they have come up with a better plan for this? Probably. Yeah. But,
one of the episodes that I liked the most about Discovery was the episode where I think it's Ariana gets her cybernetic conscious taken over by control, and she sacrifices herself and she dies. And so sometimes it's okay to let people die. Michael Burnham's belief, like, oh, we've got to save them at all costs. Like, sometimes you can't. And so
yeah.
I think this is an instance where it would have added a lot more gravitas to the show. And maybe, you don't send Tilly in this case, but that someone dies. Like, let them die with upholding the Prime Directive.
Right.
There's nothing that says that everyone makes it out alive. And so, from a writer's perspective and a viewer's perspective, I think if you would have had someone die to maintain the Prime Directive, and then afterwards you went in to fix the machinery, I think maybe that would have been a little better. I just thought the episode in general was, as I said, spiritual filler. They didn't quite think this through. Maybe they just focused on some of the other episodes and like, okay, let's just kind of make this a Prime Directive episode while we're thinking what else we're going to do. I mean, even the clue was kind of lame. I mean, like, it's the scratching on the vial. I mean, I don't know about you, Josh, but I didn't see any scratching when they're like looking at the vial, they're analyzing, like, the water. Like, where's the scratch? I mean, show us the scratch.
Right. Yeah. Again, I think there was some lazy writing. I think they're just trying to throw this together. Um, I think that I think the idea of this is really good. Unfortunately, they're trying to build off of a very beloved episode from the Next Generation, but honestly, this whole thing could have been like 1 or 2 episodes. This whole story arc could have been 1 or 2 or 3 episodes, but there and again, that's been the problem I think we've had with Discovery since the beginning. That each season has had to have this one big overarching story arc, and it hasn't been as character driven as Strange New Worlds or Lower Decks is.
No, absolutely
Uh,
not. I mean,
yeah,
where's it been character driven? It's a little bit the Doctor this season, but again, where
yeah,
did this rule of two come up? That I know that we have the rule of two with the Sith, but it appears we have a separate rule of two in this season of Discovery and in others. Like it must always be Book and Michael Burnham. Like
yeah.
no,
I
send some others. Even when you send Burnham, like in the first episode of this season, when you send her with Reese and Oroshiku to investigate the Romulan ship, they get immediately incapacitated by Locke and Maul. I'm like, no, I mean, send other people and more than
mhm.
just two. Like if this mission is so critical, why did you send two people? Why not send three? Like, oh, I don't know, like an engineer, like another engineer.
Right. I think there was a lot of criticism way back on the Next Generation, the first few seasons when Riker was always leading the away missions and not Picard. But people were like, but Picard's the captain. Should he? No, that was when Kirk was leading those away missions, that was because of the writing, and he was supposed to be the main hero. And Roddenberry kind of made it clear that Picard's main assignment was to manage the ship, not the away missions. So it always made it a big deal when Picard was the one leading the away missions. Okay. Um, so you didn't have him doing that every week because it was his main job to run the ship. The ship was his main thing. That's the way it was supposed to. Um, and yet with Berman, she's kind of gone back to that more Kirk-esque kind of thing. I'm not sure how much of that is the writing and how much of that's Sonequa's own personal insistence, because she is an executive producer on this show. That okay, if she wants her character to do more, I guess it's going to do more. But and
As many
I just
times
don't
as
want it to be
you
at the
know,
expense of the other characters.
you can't be coach and GM of your team at the same time. I mean,
Right?
you got to
You
be
can't.
one or you got to be the other because you can do your job really well as one or really well as the other, but you're not going to do it as well if you're trying to do two jobs.
We're talking to you, Travis Kelso. No,
Um,
I'm just kidding. I don't know if he does that or not.
it's too much. I mean, I understand you want to emphasize your character if you're the executive producer, but you know what? It's kind of like the Phoenix Suns just discovered when they got ousted by the Timberwolves in the NBA playoffs. We have this big three. Yeah, but basketball is a game played with five people on the court and another seven on your bench. You will always get outplayed when you don't have an actual team. Use your team. It just shouldn't be Michael Burnham a book.
Right. There is no I in team. There's a reason they call it a team sport, and it's not golf. So, I don't think
Oh,
that,
tennis.
or tennis, yes. But even then, tennis can be a team effort. But yeah, it can't just come down to uh, one person. So, and has our executive producer has been pointing out to us, very top heavy. Three players can't beat a squad.
Yes.
Yes, that is very true. And
You know what would have been an interesting twist on this? So we're
mm,
700 years in the future, and
yes,
we're still using some of the stereotypes from 700 years before, like the Brina bad guys, right? Um,
right, yeah,
the Novian as opposed to the good guys. You know what would have been an excellent twist if we would have found out that the reason why they built those towers was because the Denobulans wanted to mine their natural resources. And like maybe the Denobulans built these 500 years ago instead of 700. And guess what? The Denobulans turned into bad guys. And so this wasn't something to benefit the planet. It was something that would allow them to go and mine the natural resources of the planet. It just would have been a nice twist to see, like, oh my God,
yeah.
Miss Phlox was such this nice and caring guy. All of a sudden, they turn into bad guys.
Well, I mean, that wouldn't reflect on Phlox. It would just mean that there was a group of bad Denoblians
I mean,
that
it would have
went to
been.
this planet. Yeah, I mean, it could have been before. It could have been before the formation of the Federation.
I mean,
And maybe this was just something that when the Federation got formed and Denoblia became part of it, these guys just abandoned it, and this whole thing. And then the scientists could have remembered this, and left the clue there. That would have been a much better way to write this episode. You're exactly right.
My criticism of Discovery is that we are relying too much on like this is the way things were, like 800 years ago, and it's still the way now. I mean, yes, we've seen some evolution between the Vulcans and the Romulans because they had to join, but even then, that sort of had the roots in Picard. But like the only place we kind of see some change is that the president of the Federation is like half Cardassian, and she is not warlike. So you have to assume at some point, like the Cardassians did change, but we haven't seen the our perceptions of the races 800 years ago are still the perceptions that we have now. And like, no, races can change. Like, I would have liked to have seen, like, oh, the Denabians decided to just like take advantage of like, these people. They evolved that way. Why do the Breen have to be still bad guys? Like, maybe the Breen could have evolved and, no, we're going to be like humanitarians now. And again, your big gripe, even though I still think the Tribbles ate all the Klingons, but like the Tribbles didn't eat the Bajorans. Like,
Yeah.
where are the Bajorans? Like, okay, I see one female Ferengi among the Federation Council or whatever. Like, what happened to the Ferengi? I mean, like, show us.
Right.
This is where Discovery has really fallen down, I think, and it's run out of time. The clock has run out, game over. Like, show us how the cultures we were familiar with, how they evolved, and you haven't done that. We get the occasion, like, okay, the Gorn cut the subspace relays. Yeah, maybe the Gorn will always be the Gorn, right? But you've done a good job of showing, like, okay, the Federation fell down, back again, yada yada. What about the other races?
Right. I totally agree that again, this goes back to the problem of, okay, we wrote these giant overarching story arcs that are supposed to last a whole season. And so it's not leaving any room for anything else we would like to know about what happened in the 32nd century. Okay, the Romulans and the Vulcans remerged and they've been working on building a new culture based on the best aspects of Romulans and Vulcans. We know Earth became isolationist for a while. Now they're not.
Great. That was awesome. That was fantastic.
Yeah. And, what about the Klingons? What about the Bajorans? And what about more about the Cardassians? What about Betazoid and Denoblia and Kronos and Doria and
the Tellarites?
The Tellarites, thank you. Yeah. I think we got more insight into the cultures of the Federation on Star Trek Prodigy, which again, I think was a far better written show. I mean, I'm not trying to knock Discovery. There's a lot of things about Discovery I really do like. I think the acting is top notch. I think the actors themselves are doing the best they can. I think it's some of the best, most wonderfully cast, talented group of actors I've ever seen. But I think the writing falls short. And, I'm not casting aspersions. I don't know how much control Sonequa actually does have and how much of this is just filler stuff in. And,
So I would say I would give them the immense credit that they have revived the franchise because really we didn't have, after the end of Voyager, that was it. We didn't have anything else.
Enterprise?
I'm sorry, what? The ship?
I love how you love Fox, but you hate everything else about Enterprise. To the point you've managed to give yourself selective amnesia. So, okay, well, just a quick shout out to other podcasters, Connor Trenier and the actor who played Malcolm. Why am I blanking on names today? I'm sorry, folks. They have a new show that'll be on YouTube and various other podcasts where they examine Star Trek episodes. Just a little shade to them. And of course, they had the shuttle pod. This one I think is going to be called the Decon Room. So, but at any rate, keep watching us and then watch them.
Were they background characters in an episode of like the Next Generation or Deep Space Nine? I want to know. If there's a giant statue of Cisco and Bajor, like huge. That's what I want to know.
That would be really interesting to find out. Yeah. I mean, wouldn't it be kind of interesting though if you could like bring in Sirach Lofton as a descendant of Cisco's? Like the great grandson to the eighth power or whatever of Benjamin Sisko. And, yeah, I mean, and maybe we'll get that in Academy. I don't know. I mean, I know I'm pinning a lot of hopes on Academy.
A little too much. A little too much.
A little too much, probably. But after Lower Decks ends this season on its final season, which
Con!
yeah, I agree. That's sad that we're gonna miss that, and we still have 3 more seasons of Strange New Worlds.
We have 2 guaranteed, but it does seem 5 is the new 7, so it might totally be just 5.
Yeah, and of course, Prodigy. That's still Star Trek, but we have to go look at that on Netflix. So, it is. It's kind of like I think I've said this before, is that what they need to do is fire a bunch of those suits at the front office and redistribute the money to making more Star Trek. But I think again, this whole thing about streaming, that they've just never figured out how to monetize it properly. So I don't know what we're going to do here, but at any rate, so in the meantime, I think we should just wrap it up with a few predictions about what's going to happen coming up. Chris, I think you did see it, and you told me last night you saw in advance a scene from next week's episode.
I did, and not only does it bring back Commander Narn, who's a personal favorite of mine, that I've been wondering what's been going on with her, but it is a scene which is widely available. I'm not spoiling it for anyone. That's Locke and Mal have been apparently captured. Book tries to go in there, and she's not having any of it. Burnham tries to intervene, saying, "Oh, Book has been really helpful," and Book is saying something along the lines of like, "Well, for me this is personal." And then Narn, without missing a beat, says, "Well, the last time I remember you having something personal, you fired photon torpedoes at this very ship and detonated an isolated weapon. So let me think about this a second." No. Finally, someone who puts Book in his place and reminds everyone that, "Oh, you did some very bad things. Your track record, you don't have one. You don't get to go into this room," and dismisses him with "If we need help with our interrogation, we'll call you." So, yes, my prediction is Book gets put in his place.
Well, he gets shut down, that's for sure.
Shut down.
Yeah.
That door is shut.
Door shut. Yeah. Okay. So there's that. We have, I think, 3 or 4 more episodes to go, and one of them will be directed by Jonathan Frakes, we do know. So will they answer some questions about what life in the 32nd century with with the races we've come to know and love? Who knows? So,
at any rate, now, Josh, I heard that our producer at the end of this series of casts was going to give us our own Infinity Room.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They need to get on that. We need an Infinity Room. Yeah, because I got a lot of stuff that needs to be stored.
I mean, you can't talk very loudly right now because you're in a library. But if we had our own Infinity Room, we could yell.
Yeah, we could scream our heads off in frustration.
Yeah. So I heard, breaking news, people, we are getting our own Infinity Room.
Yeah. So that's something we tune in and see us in our own Infinity Room. Yeah, so actually, that might be a great idea to rename this whole thing.
The Infinity Room.
Yes, we just call it every week. We'll just call it the Infinity Room from now on.
Put it on T-shirts.
Yeah, exactly. So, and our producer is very amused by this. So, well, on that note, I think we'll bring this into the space dock. And Chris, do you want to let everybody know where to find you?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at ReDiscovering, and I wish everyone. Oh my goodness. This weekend has been about May the 4th. It's been about Kentucky Derby week. It's about Cinco de Mayo. I mean, wish happy celebration to everyone. And speaking of celebration, congratulations to those people who managed to get tickets for Star Wars Celebration in Tokyo in 2025. The tickets were being sold on Thursday. And so They are out, but there were a few lucky souls out there who managed to get tickets. So the force was with you.
Yes, and also,
Oh, free comic book day too. I hope all of you went as much as possible to free comic book day. Show some love. You're still on time. Go to your local comic book store and show your store why you love it.
exactly. Definitely hit those local comic book stores. They need your business. Okay, and you can find me at Josh Pritchett Jr. on Facebook, at the Northern Virginia Star Trek Meetup group on meetup.org. And I would just like to remind folks that my short story Enkidu is featured in the Bigfoot anthology Knocks and Growls. Also, you can find my other books, The Adventures of Madison Brown, The Robot Repair Girl Chronicles, is also available on Amazon, as is my first book of short stories, Bigfoot and Other Tales of the Supernatural. So on that note, I'm still Josh Pritchett. Live long and prosper,
Keep it
and
alive.
may the force be with everybody
May the
this
force
week.
be with you.